We have a few practitioners up here who are going to speak about their particular discipline. First of all, we have AbdulMalik Tailor, who you've heard already. He will tell you more about himself and more about the tours, but he's from the Muslim tours, history tours. We have Basma Khalifa, and she has done so many different things. She's involved in fashion, and I'll let her speak a bit more. We have Adama, Munu, okay, and she's a TV presenter, and she works in various different fields and try to bring the narratives of Black Muslims to a Muslim audience. And we've heard already from Imruh Bakari, and he could tell you more about himself as well. So I'm going to start off by asking a question. I only have 2 questions, and that's when you guys take over. The first question is, how can your medium be utilized to document heritage? And are you specifically trying to, or do you specifically consider the documentation of heritage? We'd like to start off. I'm going to go to you, Basma.
For me, fashion is a tricky one. I think when you can talk about film or you can talk about TV, you're zoning into one path. With fashion, to be Black, then to be Muslim, then to be British, then to be whatever else, wherever you grew up and all these different things. Taking into account also the fact that fashion is a lot to do with culture. I'm Sudanese, both my parents are from Sudan. So when it comes to including my heritage, it really comes down to my culture rather than my religion in a sense. Because I learn a lot of fashion from where I'm brought up and from where I'm raised. So I wouldn't, obviously, in Sudan, women cover their heads or their modest clothing, and obviously I do practice modest clothing. But I do think when it comes down to the culture, it's taught me the most. I think probably most women can relate to how they know what they do by what their mothers have taught them or their aunts, or kind of, you know, different traditions. Because as we say, every single Muslim African country, Caribbean country has a different culture. So what you wear is very dependent on the culture you're from. So I think that's probably how I relate to mine, and then bringing it into my practice of what I do. I'd say that everything I think about is a little bit more glitzy and a little bit more glam, because we like a bit of glitter in Sudan and we like gold in Sudan. So when I think of what I do, I think that how do I bring in that part of my life to what I do now? It's very funny because also then in London, it's a whole different realm of how you dress and what you do. And to be a Londoner, I lived in New York for a little while, and to be a New Yorker and to be a Londoner is 2 very different things. Then to be in London and to be a New Yorker, and then to be a Sudanese girl and then to be a Muslim girl is all very different things. So I think it's actually genuinely open to interpretation. I think it's beautiful the amount of hijabi girls that you have now that can be like, I'm going to make this a fashion statement. And to be able to see that and see the rise in that is a pretty incredible thing. So yeah, that's what I would say.
So I produce a series on the Islam channel called Africa This Week, and it actually is the first program relating to the African diaspora within a current affairs context. We look at history, we look at conversations around history and continual legacies of those histories, and at the brunt of it is about heritage. I wanted to create a program that didn't just detail the circumstances of Africans, which is a very huge topic, but it provides longevity, it provides a whole range of spectrum, and introduce that to a Muslim audience who may not ordinarily know that or be aware of that. And at the root of it also is this concept of who is an African, who is entitled to claim that. And I really wanted to provide a challenge to perceptions around who is an African. And so a lot of the topics that we've looked at relate to ancestry. We discuss issues around heritage, DNA. We've also looked at you know, what it means to be a Black Muslim here in the UK as well, and historically. One of the things that I also wanted to bring to the fore of that program was also to ensure that we as Black Muslims have a how can I put it, have a place in the wider discourses that are currently taking place. So we have looked at the Black Lives Matter movement. We've looked at even things around natural hair, and why is it that Black Muslim women aren't necessarily a part of that conversation? Is it because we wear hijab and there's this idea that we somehow don't have to talk about that, even though hair has always been such a political and very sensitive matter for many of us, and up until today I think that's the case. So I would say that heritage is part and parcel of what we do on the programme, and it's something that I definitely want to build upon in future.
From the point of view of the cinema filmmaking principally, I also would write as well. I identify myself as a writer. But from the point of view of filmmaking cinema, I think we should be aware that, of course, filmmaking moving images are just over 100 years old. There was no cinema per se before 1895. So the 20th century, basically, from 1900, is when cinema became significant, when the idea of images, moving images, becomes significant. And what we find is that what happened before in still images, in painting, in literature, various other forms of narrative, informed how the cinema was going to record or depict African people. And that's really what we've been wrestling with. So, in that sense, people like Ousmane Sembene becomes iconic reference point. That is of nearly, 50 years after the birth of cinema. And we've been struggling in a way to develop a cinema and a representation of ourselves through this material. Archival material which would go back to the beginning of cinema, plus what we generate from our own ideas and our own intentions. So it is within that we are beginning to try to find ourselves. What has happened is that if you look at the politics of the AU, voices of the most radical, revolutionary, and relevant constituencies of African society, the artists, have been alienated from the politics of that continent, which is why today we have the crisis we have. And I mentioned Cheikh Anta Diop. He was writing his stuff in the 1950s, 1955, 1954, his first books. They came out in French, but still, he was establishing all the stuff that Afrocentrists and Egyptologists are now, as we speak, accepting as truth, i.e. the African origins of civilization, the so-called ethnic identity of the Egyptians, etc., the unity of Africa, and its migratory processes and its significance. Cheikh Anta Diop was saying this in the 1950s, and he was ostracized by the French Academy. And not only that, the Senegalese political leaders, Sékou Touré and his cohorts. So it's been a struggle to reintegrate the relevant perspectives of African liberation and African discourse towards the center of our concerns around knowledge. And this is really what we're talking about, how film, cinema generates or replicates knowledge. And a lot of my archival work has been about that, basically.
Thank you.
How does a London tour guide do this? Well, we do share these historical finds, etc., on our social media platforms. But what happened in the beginning when we started the tour guiding, we actually approached a number of Muslim TV channels, I'm not going to mention any names, and we suggested this idea: how about we actually make a program looking at the various aspects of Muslim heritage within London? What do you think the answer was? They weren't interested. It was just too much like back and forth or whatever, and it wasn't going to get anywhere. And it was a shame. But now, 3 years on, what's happened is that there has been a TV channel that's actually agreed to make some TV programs now. So inshallah, this is our way of actually, what we've actually learned, we can actually, pass on to the wider community. And also what happened from the beginning until now is that I actually became London's first professionally qualified London tour guide. There's not another Muslim. And we look at the tour guiding industry, there's only a handful of black and Asian people, and which needs to change. galleries, museums are probably perhaps 10 years ahead. Tour guiding is a industry that does need to change, because even myself and my colleague who's from Dominica, we gave a presentation to Westminster Guides, and we looked at two different angles. I looked at the Lyceum Theatre and what Abdulmalik did with regards to trying to put a stop to a play about the life of Prophet Muhammad, and she spoke about Mary Seacole, and both our presentations were seen to be unusual. That was the word that was used. And you think to yourself, you know, in tour guiding, you have a lot of work to do, but you know, it's still going ahead. And we've tried to, as myself with Muslim history tours, we do try to, how can we say, get it advertised into mainstream media as well. And that's something that we found was perhaps slightly easier than Muslim media. It was recently, a recent example I can actually quote is when we discovered like London's first mosque in 1895. We done a podcast with a mainstream local organisation, and from there we also sent out something like similar to press releases to different media, and generally we found it was the mainstream who picked it up and they wanted to run the story. Muslim organisations or Muslim media I should say, they were more like, send us what information you've got and then we decide, as opposed to mainstream was, it's fantastic, let's run this story.
Thank you. Someone from the team, please tell me how much more time do we have left? 2 minutes? Okay, I'm going to be cheeky and say we've got 3 minutes and open up to the audience if you have any questions. Okay, you have a question?
Yeah. And this question is directed to the gentleman there, the filmmaker. You have mentioned about Diop and the problem that he had. Do you really think it is because the French contributed to this problem? Because they did not allow indigenous West Africans to make film or even to produce TV programs.
Thank you.
Well, I want to say something quite provocative and not in any biased way, because I have nothing necessarily better to say about the English or the Dutch or the Germans. But I've said it to my friends, people who know me in African film circles, know me in Pan-African film circles. I always say the French are the biggest obstacle to African unity because of their ideology of la francophonie, which nothing like that exists in the British context. The French, Haiti, starting with Haiti, and all the ex-French colonies in Africa support the economy of France. They put money in France in order to sustain France, and they see themselves as descendants of the Gauls. Those of you who know classical history know who the Gauls, if you did Latin, you know, you did Latin, right? Okay, I'm home, I'm not. The Gauls are the ancient European ancestors of the French people, right? So la francophonie is a big obstacle ideologically, and this is the big issue that Cheikh Anta Diop had with Senghor, one of the founding figures of negritude. Interestingly, the other founding figure of negritude, Aimé Césaire, from Martinique, Caribbean, supported Cheikh Anta Diop and promoted his work vigorously. So we are not talking, it's not sort of stereotypical, right? One side of the negritude movement supported what he was doing, the other side objected to him in preference to the French tradition. So that's a problem. However, the French anthropologists, ethnographers like Jean Rouch played an interesting and important role in bringing forward African filmmakers. Not always good, and Sembene had his problems with him, and I agree with Sembene that he treated Africans like insects. There's a quote from Sembene, because he was an ethnographer. He was there to measure your head and things like that. But he was a radical. Anybody who knows cinema history knows Jean Rouch is one of the most radical filmmakers. The new French cinema of the 1960s is partly his creation, the French New Wave, those, you know, film students. So there's it's not just a one-way, one-dimensional debate, but the essence of what you're saying is there's some truth in that.
Thank you.
If I'm told absolutely that we can't do one more question, then we can't do one more question. Am I told that absolutely? Can we think one more question? Is it possible? Thank you. Okay, so brother at the back, let me come running to you. I feel like Annika. Oh, you have a mic?
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Mustafa Traore, and yeah, I do agree with what was said here. Just one thing about Sekou Touré. I do not remember that Sekou Touré was proposed to Sheikh Anta.
Sorry, did I say Sekou Touré?
Yeah. Yeah,
I mean Senghor, sorry, Senghor, sorry, not Sekou Touré at all.
Yeah.
In fact,
Yeah,
I said
because,
Senghor.
Because
Yeah,
Sekou Touré had the same
And
problems. Yeah.
Sekou Touré comes from a tradition of Samori Touré,
Yeah, he is the grandson.
who is
of
absolute.
someone.
Anybody knows Samori
Yeah,
Touré?
yeah,
His role.
and
Yeah,
I do
so
agree
sorry
with you
if I-
guys when you say that things are, as a French citizen, I do recognize that things are more complicated in France, especially because of this idea of assimilation.
Yes.
Yeah, so thank you, Laura.
Okay, your defense meant that we can no longer ask any questions, unfortunately. But thank you very much. Okay, so that's the end. Please give them a round of applause.